Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fire Neural Networks podcast called Fired Up. I'm your host, Christine Mansour, and I have the pleasure of chatting with Marta Yebra from the Australian National University, where she's an associate professor in environmental engineering. Without further ado, I'd love to introduce Marta. Marta, welcome to the show.
Hello, Christine. Thanks for having me in the show.
So let's go ahead and jump right in. Could you tell me a little bit about your background, where you're from, how you got into environmental engineering?
Sure. Yes. My background is Spanish. I study environmental science in a university in Alcalá de Henares in Madrid. And I study my PhD studies as well there in the Department of Geography. And I study the use of remote sensing data from satellites to map fuel moisture content, vegetation, water content in relation to mapping fire risk. I then moved to Australia in 2010 to work on a project slightly different, application of remote sensing data for mapping carbon and water. But then I started to miss the bushfire application, where I think I see my passion. And I started a position at the ANU leading a project to map fire risk in Australia. And I stayed there, and then I still here at the ANU 10 years later.
Great. And so taking a step back, I'd love to learn about how you became so passionate about environmental engineering and bushfire specifically. How does one get into this industry?
Yeah. Well, first of all, when I studied at the university, I got engaged volunteering in a project to map fire risk using remote sensing data. And I was very passionate about the power of remote sensing data and what those imageries taken from space that is so far away can tell us. And I got very passionate about the power of the technology. And then in parallel, I was also very conscious about the bushfire problem in Spain and worldwide, and how the bushfire management was making more challenging with climate change. So I thought that pursuing a career of using this powerful technology that is remote sensing to benefit bushfire managers, it will be a good match, and that's why I continue that path.
Great, thank you. And so transitioning from Spain to Australia must have been a big transition. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that went for you and maybe some cultural differences that you encountered? And it sounds like you've been there for 13 years in Australia, so you've probably gotten used to the way of life there, but I can imagine it's pretty different.
Yes, somehow it is. In terms of the research challenges, there are commonalities. My research field of bushfires is also important in Spain, and we share challenges. But from a personal point of view, it was a big jump. I moved to Australia also with a 4 months baby and my husband, who left his job in Spain. So it was also a steep path for him to accommodate and find a new job in Australia. But I think we went through the difficulties of establishing a new life in a new country, and we found Australians very welcoming. And Canberra, where I live, is a very multicultural city, so they welcome the international community.
That's great. I've heard amazing things about Australia. I've been to Spain. I've lived there for a summer. Absolutely loved it in Madrid there. So great. So let's dive into Fire Neural Network and how you got connected with the company and how you're leveraging the technology. So could you tell me a little bit about how you first encountered the FNN team?
Sure. Yes, look, during the Black Summer fires in Australia in 2019, 2020, I'm sure you heard about those. They were catastrophic bushfires, the largest in the story of Australia. And at that time, I was putting together a research center of excellence that I lead at the moment to find better technologies for early fire detection. Because we realized that one of the challenges that fire managers had at that time was that by the time that the fires were detected and the resources were deployed, the fires were too large and they were out of control. And therefore, there were no hope to being able to fully extinguish those fires. They only could try to keep them under containment lines until weather conditions would be more favorable. So again, at that time, we started putting a team together of people from different disciplines to tackle early fire detection and suppression. We not only look nationally and not only in Australia, but also overseas. We look at what was out there that could be promising technologies to trial in Australia, and we came across far neural network lighting detectors that we were quite impressed about the technology, and from that point. We decided that we wanted to bring that technology to Australia and test it in the Australian environment.
Interesting. Okay, so yeah, the Australian fires, the Black Forest fire, was just devastating, and so it sounds like that really forced you to look outside and look at new potential options. And so, can you tell me about how you ultimately decided to go with fire neural network and the detectors, and shine light as to how that's going? That you're still using them, so it must have helped a bit.
Sure. So, fire neural networks had a very unique technology. It was a technology that no other company could offer. So again, it was there was no choice, there was no competition, but also we knew that they came from a university as well, and they had also a very strong fundamental scientific background to start with that technology that again it was well grounded with science. So again, we got in touch with them, and they also seem to be quite enthusiastic and passionate about stopping bushfires. And we show very quickly how a partnership could work well, and that's why we decided to go ahead.
Okay, great. And then could you describe the process? So could you kind of describe, how what it looks like from start to finish when you implement and leverage these detectors? What kind of data you're receiving, and just walk me through the whole process.
Well, installing the detectors in Australia was no easy task. I mean, one of the complications we had, believe it or not, was to find sites that had enough internet connection for the detectors to send the information and to process the data. So here in Australia, internet connection is not great, and most of the detectors we wanted to install some of those detectors in remote areas because it's where we really want to have early fire detection capability. So it was very challenging to find locations that have the specific characteristics that the detector network needed to run efficiently. But once we overcome that difficulty, I think it was quite a straightforward process. It was very easy to work with the company, and they came to Australia and installed the network of 6 detectors that we had in a record time of 1 week. We were very lucky that the weather contributed and we didn't have any rains during that time, so we were able to progress very well in the works. But also we also did some work internally in the ANU to have some of the installations almost ready for them to come and finalize in that week time.
Great. And so just talking generally about the progression of technology with fire, we're seeing more and more fires, large fires pop up throughout the world. And so it's becoming even more and more important to leverage these, progressive technologies to stop the spread of these fires because they're becoming increasingly more devastating. So, can you shed some light about you've been in the industry for a while, you've dealt with fires and through your environmental engineering studies and research. Can you talk generally about how you've seen, I'm sure in the last 20 years, the progression of technology and different methods to really try to keep up with the spread of these bushfires and wildfires? Could you talk generally about the trend that you've seen, potentially some obstacles? It's obviously if, you know, a system is already in place, sometimes it's hard to change that and develop and progress. And so maybe you can speak a little bit about the obstacles as well with these new technologies.
Yeah, I think in the last few years, I have seen a progress towards the use of more data-driven technology. So these days we have access to a vast amount of data and information. So there has been a proliferation of also artificial intelligence algorithms because again we have these rich data sets that are needed for the calibration of the artificial intelligence algorithms. So I have seen how there has been a big jump into using AI for fire detection and fire progression and so on and so forth. I guess the limitation is that sometimes, if not done carefully, these technologies, these AI algorithms are calibrated as a big black box where you don't really understand the process. You just throw data and you get an output. So I think we still need to be careful with that and really understand the underlying processes that are driving fire ignition and fire behavior. So that's something that I am of a lot of interest, right? It's not just, again, putting all the inputs in a machine, running the machine and having an outcome, but also understanding what are the different variables, what are the contributions of the different variables to the process, and which are the key drivers of that process.
Absolutely. So would you say there just needs to be more education in this space in general, understanding what specific data points that need to be included into the machine or into the AI, and then also understanding the data that comes out so that you can create actionable insights? Would you say that now, people are becoming more and more interested in their, actively learning this, but do you think that there's still space for more education?
Yes, definitely. There needs to be a complete understanding of the variables that go in and the outputs of the modeling. And the outputs of the modeling depend on what the variable you have used for calibrated is. So yeah, again, you need to have a clear understanding of both the inputs and the outputs and the limitations of the outputs. It's okay if your model has certain uncertainties, but those need to be recognized. And so far, managers can make decisions with that uncertainty, having into account that uncertainty.
Definitely. And so, speaking of outcomes, have there been any surprising outcomes that you've learned through leveraging this data and leveraging AI?
Yeah, well, we installed the lighting detector in February this year. And interestingly, the day after, we have a lightning storm that caused 4 ignitions. So it was a good opportunity to test the technology. Of course, 4 ignitions is not enough for a proper evaluation, but it was a good start. And we did a lot of investigation on the ignition source, and we compared those ignition sources with the information that was coming with the detectors and the high-risk lighting modeling that fire neural networks do, and the information coming from the detectors on the long continuum current. And it was very nice to see that there is great promise in the technology. Even the network was not still fully calibrated. Most of the emissions were associated to either high-risk lighting, accounting for by the environmental conditions, or with long continuum current or both. So it was a nice preliminary results to keep us working together into better understanding the information that is coming from the detectors and how we can better integrate that with environmental variables coming from Australian data sources.
Definitely. So speaking generally, obviously the Canadian fires have been, in the news all summer. It's just those have been devastating as well. Do you work internationally with different universities, or are you pretty much focused within Australia?
No, I do have a extensive network of collaborators overseas. Yeah.
Okay. So have you done any work with Canada and the fires over there? Were you involved with any of that?
Well, not directly involved in any study of the fires that have happened in Canada recently, but I've been in close collaboration with the team that is developing a satellite mission for fire monitoring that is called Wildfire Sat. I've been involved with the team developing that mission because it's very complementary to what we are doing in my research center of excellence. But also, we are also building a satellite, but for the characterization of the fuel. To know what's the dryness of the landscape, what's the fuel load, and this type of information that is relevant for characterizing the flammability of the landscape. And this satellite is very complementary to what the Canadian wildfire sat is doing, that is active fire detection, because of course, once you detect a fire, you want to know what are the conditions of the fuel, so you know with more accuracy where the fire may spread and at what velocity, and what are the potential areas where there might be wet vegetation that may act as a self-containment line for the fire to slow down and stop the spread. So yeah, having some collaborations with Canada in those lines. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, great. So we're wrapping up the episode. This has been so educational. I've learned a lot, and so thank you so much for answering all my questions. And to end, do you have any words of advice to those in the fire industry? Potentially, sometimes in regards to technology, sometimes it's intimidating to try an entirely new technology, but you kind of have to keep up. So, do you have any words of advice for people who are looking for different solutions to better detect these wildfires?
Yeah, my advice would be to try to support new technologies. I know they are always super busy and they need to make decisions that risk lives. So they need to be 100% sure that a specific technology works. But also, again, they need to give opportunities to new technologies, even if it's in an early adoption phase. Because again, this is the only way where we can make big steps, transformational changes in the way we manage bushfires. If we only base our decisions on known technologies or on information we feel comfortable with, we'll never make these transformational changes that we need to cope with the challenges that will come in years ahead with climate change and increased frequency of bushfires and the severity of the bushfires. So again, I will advise to be an early adopter of research and help with the evaluation of that research and technology.
Absolutely. Marta, thank you so much for your time today. This was a great episode. I really enjoyed chatting with you and learning about your work. And yeah, thank you for being a guest on our show.
Thank you. No problem. A pleasure.
Okay. All right. Bye.
Bye.